Essentially, right now, I'm revising all of my cash projections for April, May, and June as if it was zero, which is not a fun thing to think about. But, I do like a worst case scenario because it gives me information to take action. And then looking at, a couple scenarios beyond that.
Everything sucks at first. Very few things suck forever. That's one of my favorite quotes from John Gorman. Being an entrepreneur is such a roller coaster. Some days you're so excited. Some days you're terrified. Every day is something new, something you're testing or improving or changing. For me, this is my reminder that when you're on that roller coaster, and it might be one of those days where you're headed down instead of up, it's always changing. And tomorrow, the world might look really different. I'm Susan Bowles, and you're listening to Break the Ceiling, the show where we break down unconventional strategies you can use to save time, boost your profit, and increase your operational capacity. We still don't really know how long or how impactful this whole situation will be. So you got to take it day by day. But it won't always be like this. It'll change. And part of being resilient is just learning to roll with the punches. Because even if it sucks at first, it won't suck forever. And my guest today is showing us how it's done. Lauren Caselli owns a strategic event planning and marketing firm. She also coaches business and agency owners looking for more financial breathing room on how to institute rate raises and price their services appropriately so they can earn more per client and feel in control of their business. Lauren and I chat about how all the craziness around coronavirus has affected her events business. And we'll talk about how that's impacting her cash flow and her approach to her finances. Lauren built some great financial processes into her business that are serving her really well during this time. Hey, Lauren, thanks so much for coming here and talking to me today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
So you are in an industry that is particularly affected by the current situation, the events industry.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what's that looking like for you right now?
Yeah, totally. So I've been in events pretty much my whole career. So I graduated from college in 2007. I moved to New York, immediately went into weddings, did like very high-end weddings, and then moved to a corporate firm, and then was in a corporate kind of event department during the 2008 financial crisis, 2009 in New York City. And so that was 10 years, what years, 2020? So it's 12 years ago, 11 to 12 years ago. And at that time, there was sort of a slow slide into obviously events and marketing events specifically, and client retention events kind of were one of the first things to go. So at that time, it was like we all saw layoffs coming. We kind of saw it 6 months before it actually kind of happened. Our company at the time was able to sort of kind of do a lot of financial evaluations and projections, and we all were given a little bit more time. This year, in 2020, it is obviously vastly different in a number of industries, airlines and hospitality and tourism, but events specifically, because this, pandemic, COVID-19, has really affected gatherings. There was no warning, right? People were paying their invoices and excited up until, we're recording this on March 19th, so up until a week ago, so 7 days. And immediately for myself and a lot of my vendors and people in the event industry, it was, basically stop payment and sort of a lot of uncertainty beyond that. So we're sort of in this like holding pattern, because in events right now, there are 3 options. You cancel, you postpone, or you go digital, you go online, and nobody really knows, when to postpone to. There's lots of financial implications with cancellation. And the virtual piece it's not the same, as much as you want to, talk about it being, a great option, it's different. And so I think right now, those are the options, and none of them feel great right now. So that's what's going on.
That's where you are.
Yeah.
So what kinds of financial information are you looking at inside your business right now to kind of figure out where you head next, or what do you do?
Yeah, totally. So I think this was a unique situation in that I've been in business full-time since 2016, so for about 4 years, and then part-time for 2.5. So overall about 6 years. And last year was the first year that I started working with a bookkeeper. We really got official into QuickBooks. I was paying W-2 employee last year, and we did a big projections meeting in January, a full kind of like brainstorm, like very vision casting. And now that I'm looking at my numbers, it literally, I mean, went from, I mean, so 7 days, let me back up. 7 days ago, it was sort of like, I'm going to wait and see what's happening. There was a lot of legal stuff that nobody was sure about in terms of event cancellation, and is this a force majeure or is it not a force majeure, which is basically a clause in a lot of contracts that means you can cancel with no penalty on the client side, or on the vendor side, but primarily on the client side. So there were a few days of sort of like me being like, oh great, I get a couple days off and we'll figure this out. And then Monday, 4 days ago, it was like, oh, it's really looking like my clients are going to not be able to pay me that quickly. And so the things that I'm looking at right now, obviously Q2 is very questionable if events are being able to be held in May and beyond. And so essentially right now I'm revising all of my cash projections for April, May, and June as if it was zero, which is not a fun thing
Right?
to think about. But
No.
I do like a worst case scenario because it gives me information to take action. And then looking at a couple scenarios beyond that. Let's say 100% of those are rescheduled. What would that look like in Q3 and Q4? If 50% of those are rescheduled, what would that look like in Q3 and Q4? And if none of those are rescheduled and they're all canceled, what does that look like in Q3 and Q4? And what do I need to be doing right now to get ahead of that? So those are kind of the things that I'm looking at, but I'm really starting from a place of, if I don't get paid one more dollar in the next 3 months, what do I do?
Yeah, I think that's a smart place to be at. And I think I think that's a valuable projection for everybody to always kind of have in the back
Yeah.
pocket, is like, if, because I think there is a part of every business owner that in the back of your head, you're always like, what if everything just stopped?
Right.
And I don't think anybody ever really expects it all to just come to a screeching
No.
halt. But having
Never.
that, like, knowing what happens if
Yeah.
all of your clients cancel on one day, like, what is the real impact to your cash flow? What is your real runway if everything stops? And
Totally.
I think that is I'm the financial person. Like, I always want to be looking at the worst case scenario. Like, what is the
Of
worst
course.
possible thing that could happen, and go from there. Because like you mentioned, it's just information. It is a way to base your decisions on, what's the next best thing to do.
Right.
But I don't think anybody actually anticipated that legitimately happening to a lot of business owners. Like,
No.
nobody, it's the deepest, darkest fear.
Right.
Nobody expects it to be a reality. And I think for
Right.
lots of businesses, not just yours, it is the, like, okay, that day has come for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, obviously in my industry, it's very set in, and all of the industries who are getting a little bit of a kind of like, preview to the movie, obviously I don't want to be doomsday, but I do think that this will have a ripple effect. And there's a part of me that's like, what excellent information for a lot of, marketing agencies or people who have, teams and staff who may not immediately right now be affected, but will probably be affected by just like a pullback in or at least a pause in spending until we can evaluate, to get in front of it and like start doing the planning right now so that hopefully you never have to use it. But man, what I would give for another 2 weeks.
Yeah, like, and this was so immediate. And I think what's going
Yeah.
to be interesting is, like, is it actually a cliff,
Right.
or is it a pause?
Totally.
And for your industry specifically, as you are, thinking about rescheduling events, like, there's a cadence to these things. Like, some of the hotels and all of the, like, those are booked years in advance.
Right.
Is this just going to be a consolidation? So, like, Q3, Q4 are just event as
Right.
everybody kind of pushes. Is it going to be a compression, or like a legitimate not?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of discussion and industry wide. It's obviously if the majority of people are trying to postpone and give themselves some more time for Q4 into Q1 of 2021. But the reality is, like, once you start getting into Q1, you're essentially just postponing your event, skipping this year and pushing
doing
it
it
to
next
next year. And then also, yeah, you have to think about, for you and myself, we all have events that we like to go to every year that are already scheduled in the fall. And now we're going to have an influx of potentially 2 quarters of events that may be looking to recoup their losses or not, maintain their, at least their presence, all moving to September, October, and probably November before Thanksgiving. And so the competition is going to be, it'll be interesting to see sort of if they can even maintain their numbers of attendees, because there's just going to be a lot more bundled up. So
Yeah,
we'll
I'm
see.
interesting to see, like, so me, the scrapper in me is like, just go virtual and
Right.
make a little bit of less money, but everybody can attend that now. Everybody's sitting at home trying to figure out what to do anyway.
Yeah, of course.
But I think you're right. The logistics of a virtual event versus a
Yeah.
physical event, and what does that operationally look like?
I mean, yeah, and that's, something we can certainly dive into, but, I've been talking to a lot of people, and, there's things that they're a little harder to go virtual music festivals. And, I talked to a client who, has a festival in Oregon every year, and just, there's, festivals and those kinds of things are harder to take virtual. But if you're a
Mm-hmm.
conference leader or a workshop leader, or you're doing a user conference for your client base, those are excellent things that you can take online and potentially, I don't want to say skip a year, but pause on the enormous spending that an event is. I mean, event is like, can be, business within a business, because it's just so
Mm-hmm.
massive in terms of spending. Um, so for anyone who has content, and can still pay their speakers and things like that, I really think that a virtual conference is the way to go, rather than postponing and then really working on how do I like add the networking piece in, because the content can be repurposed. You can make videos out of it. You can do all kinds of things if you take it virtual. And so then you just sort of have to figure out the networking piece, so that you can, hopefully stay alive. I mean, there are definitely entire companies that are going to go out of business because their events are unable to be postponed or, canceled with refunds.
Modified, yeah. Yeah, and I think this is an interesting opportunity to see how people can approach what they're doing in a, like, out of the box
Sure.
way, like really looking at what are you trying to accomplish?
Hmm.
Are you trying to accomplish, for your example, like networking? Is that what people come to your event for? And is there a creative way that you can go about delivering that service
Yeah.
in a way that doesn't require face to face, and
Right.
kind of, I think there are cool opportunities to look at.
Yeah.
How do you reapproach what you're doing?
I mean, if nothing else, it's a really excellent opportunity to get to know your customer. Um, because like, if you are considering, and we don't have to go all the way into this, but if you are considering taking your event online, like this is a really great time for you to like ask your customer if they're still interested in coming to the event, a lot of good data about themselves, so that you can A, make really great connections for them, and B, learn about them. What are they interested in? How can you serve them better? So I do think that there's some, if it were me, if I were hosting a large event that could be taken digital, I would do that, and then focus on getting to know my customer for the, A, so that I can build a network so that they get to know people, digitally, and I can introduce them and help them make connections, and B, so that I can get to know them better, because I really think now more than ever, we all as agency owners and service providers need to double down on getting to know our customers so that we can know what they need right now, because like, who knows what they need right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think those of us, even the ones that like really do know our customers, I think there's value in asking the question, like, what do you need? What are you worried about?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on with you right now? Just
Yeah.
generally.
Yeah, especially right now. So
So, are there any processes that you have in place, right now, that are kind of critical for you in managing your cash flow or your finances, that maybe you put in place beforehand and have been fabulously helpful right now, or stuff that you're thinking about putting in place?
yeah, so last year, my whole goal was to like build an emergency fund. So that was a good goal to have.
Good
It was a
goal.
good goal, and so that is definitely being activated currently, in terms of, next steps. Obviously, having solid contracts was important. However, this is again one of those, un unforeseen things that, is the force majeure clause in any service provider contract is one of those ones that you don't actually think you're ever going to have to
Nobody ever
use.
thinks they're gonna have to use
Yeah,
it.
it's just like, okay, it's in here like for that time that maybe, a hurricane blows through town or something or whatever. And actually, I did one time run an event. I don't remember if you remember there was a volcano in Iceland that like covered
Yeah, yeah.
Europe and yeah, like ash.
Yeah, I
And we
was
had
living in England at the time.
Okay, yeah. So we had a conference in New York City where all of our European partners, I worked at a law firm, had to fly in and they all got grounded. So we did actually have to use some force majeure in terms of like our attrition rate at the hotel, but we did use it then. So that I'm not unfamiliar with it, but man, so many times in the last couple weeks. But yeah, having a solid contract is important, and now we have this information to go forward to say, how can we broaden our force majeure or constrict our force majeure clauses or other clauses like, I have some final payments outstanding, and I will be thinking about how I do my final payments going forward. I used to do a final payment right before the end of the event so that they knew that I would deliver my service. And now I'm like, nope, I think going forward, I'll have a, 30 days before deliverable.
Hmm.
And I guess the other thing is, like in terms of systems and processes, obviously the emergency fund and the contract, but also, I'm really lucky in that I host events for myself and I have business insurance. A lot of people don't buy business or, well, that's not true. Not that a lot of people don't buy business insurance, but a lot of people don't buy event insurance. And so this is a situation where if your event is canceled because of force majeure, you can potentially recoup some of the losses with your event insurance. So if you are thinking about planning an event or you haven't started or you are just about to sign a contract, I really highly recommend event insurance. And so for me, like, right now I'm looking through my insurance, my business insurance to see if there's any sort of coverage for this type of dramatic loss of income. So those are kind of the initial steps that I'm taking. And then on the other side, on the outflow side, I just made a couple investments that hadn't started, and I reached out to all of those providers and I said, look, I'm not going to be able to pay you until I know when I'm going to be able to pay you. So we can cancel this engagement, we can postpone it till the fall, or, we can credit it as some one-on-one time, but like right now I just don't feel comfortable laying out this cash until I actually know what's going to happen. And all of them obviously were very understanding, and I got in early. That's the other thing. Like
Hmm.
immediately, I think,
Yes.
that was kind of immediately, even though I was like, well, I don't know what's happening with my business, doing it early when I knew that later I could always buy it back or, whatever, felt just a little safer than, let me wait and see if I'm going to get paid. And, I don't want to put those people in a lurch. I think really just putting on my own oxygen mask is the most important right now.
Well, yeah. And I think, for all of us that work with teams or with other contractors, other businesses, like if you know that you are in a precarious position or you know that you're not necessarily going to go ahead, like I think any information we can give and be there to support other business owners and just say like, it's a situation that's happening to everybody.
Right.
I think being clear and upfront about it and just letting people know what's going on so
Yeah.
that they can plan or know that it's risky or know that, if maybe you decided to stick with it, like, hey, I'm sticking with it right now. But I think being as clear as possible
Yeah.
and as transparent as possible with everybody that you work with is super important right
Yeah.
now.
And the communication piece, I have my partner works in engineering. He's an engineer and he had just got a new job and is in Washington State. And I'm like, you mean your leaders in your office haven't said like, here's our contingency plan. They haven't talked to you at all about this. Like they're still going in every day. I'm just like, if, and he's getting more and more nervous. He's like, I don't know what's going on. And so, I don't have a huge team, but like, being communicative not only with the people that I work with and also kind of my vendors, I think it's just really important because if it were me, if I were on the other side, if I had a job in an industry that might be affected and nobody was talking to me about what the plan was, I would be not able to do my job every day.
Yeah, and I mean, I think fair point that I don't think anybody ever planned for this.
Right.
Even in like even if you have a business continuity plan, and I don't know that a lot of businesses actually have those.
Right.
Like just planning for a normal illness. Like, what if you, as the founder, are sick
Right.
and you can't work, or your spouse gets sick and you can't work? Like, how do you build that resiliency into your business? But then how do you respond and absolutely communicate
Yeah.
and be flexible and figure
Totally.
out, what's the next best thing?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Continuity is so interesting. I worked in continuity for 9 months, like right after that Tokyo earthquake. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember that
Mm.
like took out all of Tokyo. And I worked again for the law firm, and we had, we have 30 offices, and even now I'm like, up until 2 weeks ago, I was like, continuity plans are for big companies. Now I'm like, no, they're not.
Yes. I think it's even more critical if you're a small company. Lots of small companies, especially if you have a team or a very small team, They're you don't have a backup.
Yeah.
Like if somebody goes down, that stuff doesn't happen, or somebody else has to figure out how to do it. It's not like at a big company or like my experience, in the military. Like you slot the next person in and they do the job, and that's not possible at small companies. And I think probably planning for continuity is even more important in
Yeah.
a small business, building those resilient processes,
Yeah.
documenting your process so that somebody else can pick up where you left
Right.
off.
And hopefully you never, ever, ever have to use them. But if you do, they're there
They're
for
just
you.
there, and
Yeah.
it reduces the stress of what will probably already be a very stressful situation if you have to execute that in a small business.
Yep. Absolutely.
So you manage budgets really not only for your own business, but also for your clients. Talk to me a little
Yeah.
bit about what that looks like right now.
Yeah, totally. So, like I said, an event is somewhat, it's obviously a product stream within a business. And so it sort of often has its own budget in and of itself. I think one of the things that I often see people do is they line item an event sort of as a marketing expense, which is fine if you think you're going to get business out of it afterward. But I do usually like to break out an event as its own sort of like P&L and kind of have it be an independent piece of information so that you know if it's actually making you money or if it's just kind of a brand builder. And so I was so lucky, maybe 2016. At the end of the year, I worked with a CFO. I did like a 10-week boot camp with him through our local it's like not like the small business development, but it's like a local nonprofit that offers grants up to $2,000 grants for small business owners who are continuing their education. So we did a 10-week boot camp with a CFO who used to be the CFO of a big construction company who actually in 2008 essentially saw his entire business just like
Just disappear.
decimated. And one of the reasons was not because they didn't have contracts coming in, but because they were not diligent about their cash flow, about getting their invoices
Mm-hmm.
in and having net 30 or net 60 payment terms to go out. And he was like, looking back on it, we could have saved the company if we had minded our cash flow. And that was like, at that time was very eye-opening to me because obviously I don't have, events aren't those, huge outlays, like millions of dollars of outlays, but sometimes you're writing big checks, right? You're writing a 15 or $20,000 check or whatever to a hotel to sort of like, reserve your spot. And that, if you're not making that up in ticket revenue yet, you have to be really mindful of where that money is coming from. So I started doing this with my clients maybe like a year after I had done that boot camp because a lot of them didn't it would come to the end of the event and they'd have to outlay $100,000 worth of expenses and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I had to do that. So, or they just didn't conceptualize it. So we started doing that in terms of like, what are you bringing in? What's going out? When is it coming in? When is it going out? And then also what do you have to sell in order to break even? And what do you have to sell in order to actually make a profit on this? And putting those numbers down on paper made it really, really real for my clients. Because I think a lot of times people are like, well, high level, if I sell $100,000 worth of tickets and I, spend $80,000 worth of tickets, I get 20, it's 20,000, whatever. My cost per person is X and, here's my profit margin. But with events, like, sometimes you're paying $20,000 for audiovisual, no matter if one person shows up or 100 people show up. And so you can't really do an analysis of what it costs per person unless you are focusing on some of those like bigger costs that are fixed. So I started doing that with my clients and it came in really helpful because a lot of times I would do that with them and they would be like, oh, this event doesn't make sense at all. Why don't we just focus on, our top 3 providers and take them out to dinner and like renew contracts and things like that. And that's helpful information, right, to have. And sometimes it was, it made them be like, oh, this is really a great opportunity for me to galvanize my community and I'm definitely going to go for it. So I think just having those numbers made it easier for them to really understand the implications of, when they wanted to like hire get fireworks or something, I'd be like, okay, so that's going to be 10 grand. Is that worth it for the fireworks
Does
show.
anybody really care about the
Right.
fireworks?
Like
Like,
or do they care about, getting to know other people at the conference and networking and things like that? So, yeah, so that was helpful because a lot of times people would hire me and I would say, okay, let's do this projection. And then they'd be like, I'd talk myself out of business, but I'd rather that than people lose their shirts on something that may or may not continue, relationships with potential customers.
yeah, I think your point about managing cash flow is so important, especially in a industry where events, your outputs and your inputs can be months and months
Right.
and months apart.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at only like your profit and loss of that particular thing, you're like, oh, that looks all right. And I think it's interesting that you did this boot camp with the CFO. That I think that is absolutely the part that runs businesses out of business so often is they're looking at their profit and loss and they're saying, well, I'm profitable. I must be fine. Like, I'm good. I'm profitable. I have a profit margin. It's okay. And we're not really thinking about how to manage the money coming in and the money going out and the potential separation of those two things.
Yeah.
It's the same way so I owned a retail running store,
Hmm.
and we had a long time of you have to hold inventory.
Right.
In order to be able to sell things, you have to purchase inventory from your supplier, and then you may or may not sell it at some point down the road.
Right.
And being able to manage the cash flow of what do you have in your store versus, who's coming in and what are they buying? And did you make some really bad inventory choices
Right.
where it was stuff that you thought was really cool and ended up not selling and now you have to sell at a giant discount?
Right.
And being able to, I think, to kind of cut your losses
Yeah.
of if it's something that didn't sell, well, take what you can get for it and take the cash and move on to fight another day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Ugh.
Which is, I think, like my instinct for your clients that
I
are
know,
like,
right?
oh, I don't want to go virtual. I'm like, go virtual, reduce ticket prices and take whatever cash you can
Right.
get.
Do what you have to
Like,
do.
just take it and go.
Just now. I mean, and and sometimes there's a good business case for canceling. Like have seen some, especially now because so many vendors are really willing to be flexible because they're, if you're thinking, I don't, obviously I'm in the event industry, so I'm not trying to, just influence anyone one way or the other. But if you think about you, obviously, if you have an event coming up in the next 3 to 6 months, you are obviously thinking about potentially canceling or postponing or going virtual. And if you look at all your contracts and your next payment is due in the next, you know, 2 or 3 months, but you're not quite sure what the environment's going to be. And you're like, if I cut my losses, I only lose, $5,000 right now. I haven't sold any tickets and all I did was put a deposit down. Like that might be an okay thing to do. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not asking anyone to take any losses, but the reality is like let's say you put a $5,000 deposit down on the venue. They do not want to lose that $5,000 deposit. And if you are like, can I use this in a credit in a year? Or can I like just you keep the money and I'll take it as a credit and we'll do a company party in December, whatever, you might be looking at that might be a better decision if you haven't laid out a lot of cash right now. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a great point that oftentimes, it's always hard for us to let go of sunk costs. And a lot of time we're talking about sunk costs as in terms of like, our emotional
sure.
investment or the work that we've done towards something. But there's a real true thing of, a $5,000 loss now is potentially so much better than $100,000 loss that ends up happening in, September.
Right.
And that should be a fair part of the evaluation of what you're looking at, particularly right now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's a decent place to sort of wrap up the conversation. Is there anything you think we should talk about that we haven't talked about yet, or that you are thinking about for your own company or for your clients' companies?
Yeah, I think, again, I'm definitely, because this was hit so hard, our industry, like I am definitely in the putting on my own oxygen mask. I've reached out to all my clients to be like, tell me what you need and tell me how I can help. But I'm also assuming that none of my invoices for the next 3 months are going to get paid. And I also think that like, this is a really great time for me personally, and also anyone who is like trying not to wait and see and like say everything's going to blow over in 3 weeks. I really think it's a good time to be creative in terms of how you can help your clients. So I have a client who I work
Mm-hmm.
with. He just had an event in January, and he's still fully planning on doing it next January. And, a lot of our event work is writing communication plans for event attendees and helping with website builds and things like that for event sites. And so now I'm sort of like, what can I do to not only replace the income that I have, but what can I do to be of service to the clients who I currently know, who know my work, who are willing to work with me on a variety of projects. And so really just trying to be creative of how I can be of service so that I can, to be honest, keep the lights on, whether that's writing projects, whether that's, consulting, whether that's, doing projections on events, if you cancel versus if you postpone. So really just being creative about how I can be helpful, not only to my current clients, but to, my community and things like that. And also has to get paid for it. I think a lot of people are doing free stuff right now, which is excellent. I think, it's a great time to sort of practice. But I also think that at some point it's not,
It's not helpful to
it's
offer
not helpful
everything
to
for
like
free.
go out of business just because you want to like provide information. So
Yeah, I think there's a real balance. I think the direction you're headed is what I would encourage everybody to do is think creatively about like what you can offer, what are your skills, what are you what do you know how to do that may not necessarily be what your current business looks like,
right.
but could be the business that you have going forward, whether that's a big pivot or a little pivot
Right.
or that sort of thing, but also recognizing that things for free are helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think we all kind of do that. Everybody's got free content that they've put out. Like
Sure.
everybody's done things that are of value for free, but that you can still charge for your time and charge for what you're putting out, and that's good and helpful, and that everybody will eventually recognize that, that's how everybody survives is we kind of work together and we kind of share the wealth, I think.
Yeah, I've been really trying to, I have a lot of great entrepreneurs in my community, and they're all excellent. And a lot of them are like, I'm a photographer, but I really want to help other people. And I'm like, you got to put your oxygen mask on first. So like,
Mm-hmm.
you got to do what you have to do to protect yourself. And there are tons of ways you can help, and be of service. And, don't think that you need to like donate to all the restaurants and put yourself in jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
Do that
Do
if you
what you
can.
can if you
But
can. And
also,
if not, yeah, I love the put your own oxygen mask
yeah.
on
Yeah.
first. And I think that's a great place to close it out on. So,
Awesome.
where can our listeners find you if they want to connect or learn more or need help with their trying to figure out what they're doing with
Totally.
their
Yeah,
event?
absolutely. So I mostly on Instagram at Lauren Caselli _. And then my website is just laurencaselli.com. And, I write a pretty robust blog. Have been writing blogs recently, especially about what to do with your events. So if you're curious, head over there. I've got some content on the blog.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming here and for being so transparent with what's going on with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My favorite takeaway from this interview was Lauren's point to put your own oxygen mask on first. That can be applied in so many different areas right now, and it's a message that I personally found really helpful. Right now, putting on your own oxygen mask might mean being realistic about what you can get done when you're suddenly working from home and homeschooling and working with more people in your space. So, what expectations for yourself and your business do you need to adjust? It might mean re-examining your cash flow projections and, like Lauren talked about, run your own worst case scenario. Even if it's not ever going to actually happen, what does that really look like for you? Knowledge is absolutely power here. Or it might mean shoring up your operations and looking at where you could streamline. I have a concept that I like to call minimum viable administration. Basically, what is the minimum amount of people, systems, and processes that you can use to run the back end of your business? How small and simple can you get and still be really efficient and resilient? Usually, by following that approach, you'll also save a bunch of money and increase your efficiency. And if you love this idea of minimum viable administration and you want some help getting there, reach out. I'd love to help you figure out what that looks like for your business. You can shoot me an email at susan@scalespark.co Or if you just want to hop on a call and talk it through, there's a link in the show notes where you can schedule a call with me, and we'll figure out what your top priority should be right now. Break the Ceiling is produced by Yellow House Media. Our production coordinator is Sean McMullen. This episode was edited by Marty Seefeld with production assistance by Kristen Grunbeck.